Marco, thank you so much. And for everybody on the call, welcome to Reflections on SIGMOBILE's 25th year. So we have a panel of, shall we put it, pillars of the community, which I'm sure you all know from many prior events, if you've attended MobiSys, MobiCom events and SIGMOBILE in general before. So I won't read the bios, which are all on they're all on the website, MobiSys website. But I would like to introduce our four panelists. Victor Bal, Microsoft for many years, and I believe he's taken many roles in that time, and now he is also the CTO of Azure Operations. And most important for this panel, he was also one of the founding members of SIGMOBILE and the conferences SIGCOM and MobiSys. So perhaps we should ask folk to unmute the mics just for a moment and just give a little clap to introduce Victor. Great. And our second panelist is Mary Baker, currently with HP Inc. And she is a 3D print software architect in the company at the moment. And she was also the first MobiSys program chair, or program co-chair in 2003. So I'm sure she'll have some nice stories about that. So again, welcome, Mary. And our third panelist is Nigel Davies, Lancaster University in the UK. And he is a distinguished professor and also is well known for many pioneering mobile computing applied research projects. And it'd be interesting to hear his perspective from 25 years ago about some of those, particularly the GUIDE project, which is probably his most well-known project in the past. So thank you, Nigel. And finally, we have P.R. Kumar, Texas A&M University. He is also a distinguished professor, and so I get this right, he holder of the College of Engineering Chair in Computer Engineering at Texas A&M University. And he has done a lot of work in pioneering mobile computing theory and received an Outstanding Contributions Award along those lines. So, so welcome everybody. We wanted to divide this panel into sort of a perspective on past, present, and future. So 25 years is a long time, and a lot has happened. So it'd be interesting to hear your reflections on what it was like 25 years ago, what you expected out of the SIG, where we went, where we are now, and where we might go in the future. So having said that, I will pass over to each of the panelists to give us a 5-minute position, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience, and I'll throw in a few additional questions that I've got prepared as well. So with that said, Victor, over to you.
Thank you, Roy. First of all, thank you for doing this. This is really fun. I think, man, life is so hard. You know, I've been so busy, but this idea of doing the panel and reflecting back did force me to go back to, believe it or not, my inbox and look at all the emails that I still actually have from that time on, from going back to 1995, actually, even before that. I was at Digital Equipment Corporation. Many of the young folks may not even recognize that name, but that was a pretty big company, and you know, it was a creator of the workstations. And you know, I was working there. I was actually doing my PhD at UMass as well, and I was working with IMRIC. And so I wanted to publish. I was doing a bunch of stuff in wireless, and I wanted to publish, and the only conferences around were things like Infocom and ICNC and lots of IEEE conferences. And there was not really any computer science conference. I mean, there was SIGCOM, of course, but you know, SIGCOM is a very wide kind of a conference. And there were no real professors in mobile computing per se. I mean, getting tenure in mobile computing communications was not easy because it wasn't a recognized field at the time. Anyway, you know, we started MobiCom in '95, and that was a big success. Before that, there was Satya had started this workshop, WSMC, which is now known as Hot Mobile. But for 1 year or two, it was stopped. But the thought was, how do we create a community? This was going to be a field. At that time, remember, there was no Wi-Fi. There was no 802. Well, there was 802.11 had just come out in 1995. There was Waveland, if you remember, for those of you who are old enough, there was Waveland. And Waveland was really a Lucent company at the time, but it come from NCR. It come from cash registers. You know, that's kind of what it was. And so a lot of us in the labs were still doing this stuff, and had this dream that wireless will be pervasive and everything else. And so we needed a community. We needed a thing to bring people together. And it became obvious. So then I actually did write to ACM suggesting that we create a SIG at the time. And it was well received, and they said, yeah, let's do it. I actually have the original email that I wrote to ACM. I've shared with a few of you, and I was reading that, and I was looking at what has changed from then to 25 years from now. So the question you asked is has it gotten to the point where we thought it would? To be honest, I think it has taken longer than I expected it. That's the honest answer. I think that when we started at that time, the expectation was that it would really bubble fast. And I too believe that part of the reason has to do with, and I'm not pointing any fingers here, has to do with how the cellular industry evolved in parallel in some sense. So there were these two things which were very academic, very researchy, with unlicensed band where we could all play and we could innovate. And then there was a much more controlled thing, which was the licensed bands and the cellular technologies. Now, so in the unlicensed space, you could sort of see how much growth had, how many new technologies and wireless have come, the mobile computing is taken off, smartphones, all that good stuff. And then slowly, steadily, I mean, there used to be panels where I would sit and argue where people would rate 3G at the time, 2G, 3G would be everywhere. And I would say, well, wireless LANs are going to be everywhere, and it's going to be on the network. So we went from there to where we are today. And I think, I don't want to take up too much of the time because hopefully there'll be more to say here, but the point is that where I see us now is still a tremendous evolution happening in the unlicensed space. But now I see a glimmer of hope, actually a big hope, because the IT industry, which if you think about the cloud and you think about how much work or how many features come out so quickly, and you look at the telco industry and you see how slowly it is, they are starting to converge. The infrastructure is starting to converge. The job that I've taken up now is Azure for operators as in the telecommunication industry. So it's about that. And I left my research job from 24 years voluntarily because as I saw this sort of a phase, and I thought there's not something that I could avoid. I couldn't be sitting on the sidelines or doing the research and not doing the main part of it. So I jumped in along with a bunch of other people. So in the community sense, I think the SIG is going to really see the growth. Now, old debates that we have had in the past, I mean, we can talk, this is about MobiSys. I just kind of want to make a couple more points and very quick about MobiSys. So the emergence of MobiSys happened because MobiCom was under tremendous pressure. Every business meeting in MobiCom that we used to have was about why the papers were not being selected and why this was, the acceptance rate was so low. The pressure on the system was so large because the community really needed to grow. And so, it became obvious in about 2002 timeframe that we needed to sort of separate and create more new things. And so we created MobiSys, we created MobiHawk. There were other conferences that were going by. Census came out of SIGMOBILE as well. And then, obviously Hot Mobile came in, and now Ubicom and Pervasive, all these things started to emerge at that time. But so that was what was going on. And then there was a lot of discussion about whether we should, we should tie in the industry. Should we go down the SIGGRAPH route where we have this academic conference plus we have this industry? And there were debates on both sides. It was very, very sort of if we had done that, so if I look back, you didn't ask this question, but if I sort of look back, and I think that was one kind of a mistake we did, which we did not emerge or tighten our relationship with the way, like the way SIGGRAPH did, because we could have, and we could have been much, much bigger, and we could have been bigger, in fact, than SIGGRAPH is today, or has been, which is the biggest SIG there. So I think that was a mistake, and I think part of it was just, this is a voluntary job, you know, for voluntary stuff, we have our regular jobs.
You have a day job as well, yes.
Yeah, so it's not easy to put that much time in it, but you know, for the new leaders, as they think about the growth, I think it is time to think about those things too. How do we sort of bring these two together? How do we take advantage that we have learned from COVID of working from home and expand things? I'll stop here. There's yeah, one of the things that people don't know about is that, you know, people take workshops for granted now. Like they assume there's a conference and there's going to be a workshop. This idea of co-locating workshops with conferences actually came from SIGMOBILE. We were the first SIG in the entire ACM that brought this together, because we knew these amazing ideas needed to be cultivated. They didn't have like prime time conference, but they had to have an opportunity to grow. So we kind of really did that, and then you can sort of see what it did everywhere. There were many such initiatives that we have taken, but you know, there's more time, so I'm going to stop here and let Harry and others speak as well. But it's been really fun. I think, yeah, we have had a good time. So thank you for having me.
Thanks, Victor. We'll come back to your thoughts shortly as we go through the panel.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just here. So the next up, we have Mary Baker. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Roy, for inviting me to this. It's hard to believe this much time has actually gone by. So actually, if you, I guess you're flipping through slides.
I'm sharing. I assume that everyone is seeing them.
Yeah, so I was just wondering if you could move to the next slide.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I really appreciate hearing Victor's comments. It brings back memories of what the time was like. I have here a splash page of the first MobiSys conference, so 2003, so we have a couple years to go for an anniversary there. But Victor was instrumental in starting this conference, and I had the honor of being one of the first technical program chairs. And I'm remembering just what an exciting time it was. It had all of the excitement and all of the chaos the field did of a frontier, and it was a frontier. And not to say that there wasn't plenty of work that had gone on before in mobility, especially on the radio side, but actually thinking of it from the point of view of applications and middleware and things like that, there was just a tremendous amount of excitement, and it was a lot of fun to participate in it. Yes, it was hard, and in some, I know at least one instance of a failure to convince an academic institution that mobile computing at the time was a legitimate topic for academic research. That would be my own case, but there was just a lot of work blossoming everywhere. And it's fun to look back at the program committee for that first conference too. I still frequently find myself missing Gaetano, for instance. A lot of really good people and interesting work that came from everyone who was associated with this. Thinking about the topics that were very important at the time, or at least much discussed, there was lots to do with location sensing of different kinds, apps, middleware, network protocols and interfaces. There was already work on research on resource and energy management. I know that has grown over more recent times as well, but there was already work there. If you look at the topics in the original MobiSys, remote execution was a big deal. Also, one of the reasons for MobiSys was a place for people to do work actually characterizing networks, measuring things, because it was hard to get measurement papers into other conferences at the time. So MobiSys became a place where you could do that, and still is a place where you can do that. So I think it's interesting to look at the topics that were prevalent then, and one thing that wasn't as prevalent then that is big news these days is machine learning for sensing and otherwise making sense of the environment, especially for mobile and UbiComp purposes. There was a lot less of that back around the time of the first MobiSys. My own personal favorite topics were things like seamless connectivity and handoff across networks, and end user accessibility, control over your mobility and how you were reached, your identity online, And one of the things that was debated quite a bit at the time was what should be the right model of mobile computing? Should it be that you carry your computational interfaces with you, or should it be that wherever you go, you find what you need there? So kind of take it with you model versus an at your destination model. And there was a lot of debate and work on those different models at the time. And of course, wearables were already a consideration, and a lot of fun. Had Stern people like that. Yeah. So the present, that was the past. The present, I think we can look back and at least some of the topics that I mentioned. I think a lot of people now kind of take it for granted that you can move from your wireline to your wireless and it all just kind of works. But that was not the case when we started, and it pretty much is now. I think that we can say that it really is true. People carry around mobile computers with them. So I think we can say that folks who kind of lined up on that side of the model, that they won to some extent. On the other hand, the model bringing your computer with you, your phone in this case, is supported by a huge amount of infrastructure. So in that sense, the other side also won. So I think you could say it really has ended up being kind of a hybrid. On the other hand, the idea that you would go to a booth and it would have what you need at your destination, that is certainly true in a lot of cases, but they tend to be special purpose situations and not general purpose. Except perhaps you might think about smart home assistants as a growing exception to that. On the other hand, things I think we didn't predict at all well. I don't think anybody that I know at the time predicted the App Store concept and that might really be what brought mobile computing into play for so many people on Earth. So I think that was a big deal and one that most of us at least missed. I know I missed it. Also, looking at the UbiComp side of things and having things like smart home assistants or office assistants, smart devices, while there was a lot of work around smart computing in the infrastructure, I don't think most people predicted that speakers would be sort of the product hook for that. So I've also thought that was kind of an interesting thing to reflect upon. Wearables presently continue to evolve. I think that they aren't so much generalized. I had a lot of excitement around slapping a tiny computer on your wrist. I was really into smartwatches, and there are smartwatches now, but they have taken a long time to really come about. Most of the wearables, I think, that are really successful, things like hearing aids and things like that, tend to be more special purpose. I have a picture here on the right, though, of a wearable, the WIM1 from WIM Labs. Still maybe arguably my favorite smartwatch, even though of course it disappeared. This was back in 2011. A really, really wonderful device in many ways. If anybody wants to ask me about it, I can talk to you about it. It was an Android system and I love programming apps for it. But so many of the good things about it you can't actually find in current smartwatches. So I think there's still a lot of work to go on wearables, at least if, from a kind of generalized point of view. Of course, currently much more emphasis on machine learning, things like that. And then last, I think I'm probably running out of time here. Roy, you can like wave a flag at me or something. But I think looking forward, some of the things I believe I see happening, and you know, free prognostications are worth what you paid for here, but I think I see room for a lot more in the way of actuators being brought into so many aspects of what we now think of UbiComp and mobile computing, and not just sensors. So domestic products like, you know, I really need a cat door that doesn't let in the raccoon, but does let in the cat. You know, where is my robot for crawling through the crawl space under my house? All these things that we could do, but haven't done. And part of that is really on the actuator side, the expense and the control in that arena. And then environmental devices at scales. We look at the Pacific Northwest right now and the 114-degree heats where there should be hardly any heat and mostly 50 degrees and raining. So I think there's a lot of work sensing for the environment right now. I think we're going to start seeing some desperate attempts at also actuation for controlling environmental issues. And I'll skip a lot of this here to make room for others, but I think we'll see much more. So generally, I think we're going to see more around physical product design and how that can influence very dramatically what the mobile or UbiComp system is, and not necessarily. So I think this is actually going to be a little bit more of an emphasis on the product design itself and what it can mean for you in terms of privacy and interface and so forth. And I think we'll also still see displays being kind of a constraint. You know, we carry a lot of computing with us, but display size is still an issue, as people like Nigel can probably talk about. And we still, we're still lacking how to compensate for that or what to do instead. So I'll stop there and give everybody else an opportunity. But thanks for having me. This is lots of fun.
Mary, thank you. Wonderful to hear your perspective and look back onto the early days of MobiSys. I'd forgotten all the topics that were even in the first one. That's great. So next up, we have Nigel, Nigel Davies, Lancashire University, and maybe a slight UK perspective. You would think with my accent that I would have a UK perspective, but I'd already been living in the US for about 5 years before SIGMOBILE was formed. So how was it perceived in the UK, Nigel?
Well, I have to just distract myself fleetingly from the football. This is the main thing for this evening in Europe, as it was, you know, for back then. I think what I wanted to do is just sort of reflect on these 25 years, and both from a sort of, you know, European US perspective, but also from a kind of applications perspective. And I was sort of struck really by in some ways the progress that we've made over the last 25 years. So I kind of went back, as Victor did, dragged back through my emails, and went back to a panel back in 2001 in Rome, for anyone who was at MobiCom in Rome. Fantastic venue, you know, extremely hot. I remember that for sure, but it was just an amazing venue, an amazing conference. And I was on a panel chaired by Dave Johnson around the search for the killer app. And at the time, I think I was there as the sort of the applications guy. People tend to remember me more for the applications I've built than any of the actual underlying tech and the problem domains. And so I'd just basically been working on these kind of tour guide systems that many of you will remember from that era. And I was asked to talk about sort of some killer applications. And, you know, I hadn't really prepped this. And I basically sort of started thinking about the problems that I'd had that day. And like almost everyone else who went to that conference in Rome back in 2001, you paid a pretty random amount for the taxi from the airport or the train station to the hotel, and you took a pretty random route, really. And so I picked the three problems I'd had, you know, in the last couple of days. So one was, I said, I really want a taxi service where I can press a button and get a taxi, and I don't want to have to pay in the local currency, and I don't want to have to negotiate with the driver and all this kind of stuff. And then the other things was, you know, at the time I, you know, traveling as a vegetarian, it's much harder 25 years ago than it is now. And I used to dream of having a button I could press and a pizza would arrive, a vegetarian pizza. I didn't want to have to kind of program anything. Again, just wherever I am in the world, deliver me a veggie pizza. And then the last one was, you know, I drank way too much back then. Well, probably still do, but then, you know, the challenge was basically getting home at the end of the evening. And so I thought, wouldn't it be great if basically at the end of the night in a bar, I could essentially look at my phone and have some directions back to the hotel. And these were the kind of three ideas that we talked about. And it was, you know, at the time, some of those, of course, were based on stuff that was around, but it felt quite, you know, it felt quite novel, right? And the thing that's been remarkable, I suppose, in a way, is all of these applications that we started to think about, particularly the mobile ones, really, you know, they've all come true for sure. And it turned out that we didn't really need a killer app per se. I mean, it wasn't one app at all. It was, as Mary said in the App Store discussion, it was really a collection of them, but really based on kind of location primarily. I think it was the big seller. I think mobile components and things that you would actually want to use every day. In a way, they were solving quite specific problems, quite small problems, but everyday problems. Next slide, Roy. And I suppose when I think of the present, we've made this huge success, right? For sure, huge progress, and things like the iPhone transformed a lot of the mobile computing kind of research that I do. But this isn't my phone, but it's a lot like my phone. It's got the same kind of rugged, road-worn, you know, dropped a few times kind of feel to it. You know, and I upgrade now primarily when the battery dies. That's the main driver for upgrading my phone. And that's because in a way there aren't lots of new features that are coming out. It feels like at some level on the application side, we've kind of plateaued a bit. No really new applications, no compelling need to upgrade or change. And the applications I'm using on my phone are more or less the same as I was using, you know, certainly 5 years ago, and maybe even longer. So next slide. So what I tried to do, I thought, okay, well, this is, you know, another panel. I'll just sit down, and I sent Roy the slides about 5 minutes ago with, well, okay, what problems did I have today that I wished I had a mobile computing solution for? So the things I did today, I was doing exam marking, you know, 250 exam scripts, and getting harder and harder, partially as I age, but also as the number of students increases, to kind of keep me sort of kind of calibrated. I wanted actually something to help me keep consistent as I was going through the marking. I had a bunch of kind of management style meetings of varying degrees of trickiness. And a lot of the time I was kind of interested in what's the kind of institutional memory, what's the history around this, you know, how might this play out with a couple of scenarios. Somebody asked me not actually what the number was on my office, but on an office that I frequent a lot, so they could deliver some equipment. I had no clue what that office number was. I had to walk downstairs to find the office and work out what the number was. And of course, you know, I couldn't find my office keys earlier today. The standard kind of problems that basically plague me every single day. And I think when we start to go forward in the mobile computing domain, to me, we're probably at a really exciting time where we can start to imagine a lot of these new applications emerging. And again, I don't think it'll be one killer application, but I suspect this shift towards new ways of helping us, particularly around cognitive tasks, you know, decision making and memory and so on. For me, I think those are the really exciting ones where we'll start to see lots of solutions, and that will drive a whole new area of research. But crucially, it's a very interdisciplinary area. The applications are going to be, you know, requiring solutions from all sorts of different domains, and our role, a lot of our role, will be around that kind of technology provision. But it's a really exciting time, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Well, at least when you've lost your keys and you're feeling sad, you can order a pizza.
Exactly. I didn't dwell on the UK EU US split, right? I mean, primarily because I'm not, you know, I wouldn't particularly claim to be an expert in that, but I think in research it's become much more harmonized for sure, and actually largely I think in terms of the consumer market, things like the sort of different choices of handsets and the spectrum that we saw 25 years ago, there's so much convergence now really in that space.
Yeah, you know, I guess I was thinking along the lines of, I remember coming to California sort of 1991, and people, I think generally the culture was much more open to sort of new ideas, and mobile was kind of a new idea. On the other hand, you also had the Nokias and the Ericsson cell phones, which were almost commonplace by I think about 92, 93, and that wasn't happening in the US. US lagged for a while on feature phones. So there was kind of an interesting, you know, development there.
Even in 1994, I remember I lived for a while in Italy, and at first couldn't understand what people were doing, walking around talking to themselves, because you didn't see that in this country. So mobile phones of any kind took a longer time to hit here, other than say inside cars.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly when I moved to California for a while in 1999, and I remember turning up and going into a cell phone store. And the salesperson asking me where I wanted it to work, and I did, you know, I just, well, everywhere, obviously. I mean, it's a mobile phone. Well, you know, and then there was this whole thing about, you know, analog or digital, and you know, roaming, and yeah. So there were a lot of these things where it felt like there was a you know, noticeable difference. But I suppose for me, you know, traveling back and forwards over those 25 years, it feels like a lot of those differences have kind of faded away.
Yeah, yes, become more uniform. Okay, well, thank you. And on to our last panelist, Pierre Kumar.
Thank you, Roy. So if you could kindly advance the slide.
There we go.
So I'm going to start with the present. In some ways, that's the least I have to say on that topic. Clearly, there is, as Victor has mentioned, great success in the single hop wireless, mobile to the base station, the cell phone problem, and mobile to access point, all the Wi-Fi generations. And useful applications are emerging, continuous glucose monitoring, as well as video conferencing, on which most of us lived the past year. And there has been a relentless push towards increasing the last mile bandwidth, 2G, 4G, 5G, etc. And clearly, these things are designed to support more data-hungry applications. But I want to focus on the wireless case. And if you could go to the next slide.
Oh, that didn't work, did it? 1 second. For some reason, I'm not sure why. Yes, there we go.
Okay, so let's go back and into the past, and that's very interesting. We had a lot of initial euphoria and lots of hopes. And basically, one of the big hopes was building collaborating communities. Okay, now, one example, and in the defense case, a collaborating community is like is built around a wireless network. And the military here at least wanted to build this joint tactical radio system, which is a program for about 1,600 nodes to get 2 megabits per second over a 5 megahertz bandwidth. And it was a $7 billion program. And it was canceled after 10 years of discussion in 2011, simply because it wouldn't scale the way that they were hoping. So that was a huge lesson that was learned. Next click, please. Another hope that many people had was building community wireless networks. And the vision was, you know, we in the US, we live together, but are often separated. And the vision was to have neighborhood wireless networks over a frequency band, a radio frequency band with a range of 1 kilometer. And the whole idea was to build community organizations and so on. And many companies also were interested, like Victor's group in Microsoft came out with software for this community wireless networking. There were many other organizations. But the reality in 2021 is that you cannot communicate with your neighbors over these unlicensed bands. You still have to go up the cell phone hierarchy. And, you know, and of course, all of these things are expensive, right? And we still have a huge digital divide. Nearly 17 million school children lack internet access at home. So I think this has been one of the things which hasn't taken off. And I don't have a very clear understanding of exactly why. I think it's a political, socio-economic. There's all this talk about beachfront property and many ideological divides between private and commons and buses and so on. So that was a real hope that many people had. It somehow hasn't quite taken off to the extent that it could. And I don't think the bottleneck is technological. Okay, next click, please. Another hope was wireless vehicular networks. And in fact, the FCC allocated 5.9 gigahertz in the about 75 megahertz in the 5.9 gigahertz band for this intelligent transportation system. And their vision was a nationwide network that enables communications between vehicles and roadside access points and other vehicles. But the reality in 2021 is completely different. While the vision was of collaborating and cooperating vehicles, avoiding collisions with each other and increasing efficiency and so on, the reality is very different. It's lone wolf cars with zillions of onboard centers that don't talk to any other cars. There is absolutely no cooperation or collaboration between cars. And based on simple geometrical considerations, that you can show that many of the accidents, corner point accidents that you had, even just one bit sensing, like that there was a pedestrian or another car would help. But that has not happened yet. we still rely only on onboard sensors. I have a car which actually has the capability for vehicular networks, but it hasn't been turned on. And I'm not sure whether the spectrum that FCC has allocated will continue to be there, because there are a lot of contenders for that very lucrative spectrum. Why did this fail? I don't completely understand, but perhaps I wonder whether one reason is the premature standardization of the SRC. They basically just took the Wi-Fi protocol and simply adjusted the interframe spacings for longer range, and that doesn't a standard make. They never took advantage of the beautiful structures that vehicular networks have. It's not just random access. There is a heartbeat, there is group movement of vehicles, there is segregation in different lanes. So all these properties, none of them were taken advantage of, and the standard generally doesn't perform well, and etc. But this did not take off. So again, what's happened is very different from the vision that people had. Next slide. So what about the future? So interestingly, the FCC in the US in July 2016, it opened up 10.85 gigahertz spectrum in the millimeter band, 3.85 gigahertz licensed. And what is very interesting is 7 gigahertz, not megahertz, gigahertz unlicensed. And they also proposed another 18 gigahertz proposed for later release. And of course, these things, this band has to cope with the challenges of millimeter and terahertz waves, absorption, directional transmission. Because of the absorption, you want to channel the power in more narrow directions, and issues such as beam management and so on come into play. So this 7 gigahertz unlicensed band, if we could somehow technologically exploit it, okay, with not too much capital being spent to create lots and lots of base stations or whatever, can do a lot. It can really create a ubiquitous, pervasive, all the adjectives that we like in SIGMOBILE, information society. Question is, what are our hopes and dreams for this huge unlicensed band? Okay, I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumar. And it does bring the question to mind. A lot of our research has been around wireless technologies, but it isn't really the universities or the academics who have necessarily pushed them out. So I'm thinking of the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi, and in order to play in some of the places that that you're pointing to here, I wonder if it really is the industry, mobile industry, which has to drive this, or do you think the universities still have a role in this?
So I think, as Victor said, very interestingly, the growth of this was accompanied by the growth of the cell phone industry and the commercial aspects thereof. So what I see is this commons, open access, if you will, open source kind of approach to wireless. That has not taken off to the extent that the cellular industry has taken off. And I think that this is not just an industry academia thing, but it also has various economic and political, ideological ramifications, and also somehow this general issue of somehow, in many cases, the commons has a hard time taking off. But we can but there's a lot of exciting research to be done. For example, in this unlicensed 7 gigahertz band to spawn a lot of ideas and so on. So I think there is a lot of room for universities to kind of demonstrate small scale systems and so on. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.